Well, hello and welcome back to Brave New Teaching. We are so excited about the episodes that we have coming for you. Starting today, we are doing a 3-part series all about discussion strategies, ways to teach speaking and listening skills that are explicit, some that are just kind of implied. And this is a brainchild of, you know, and I love her, Amanda. So why don't I let her? Yes. So Amanda, like, where did this idea come from? Because when you said, hey, we should do a whole discussion series, I was like, yep, don't even have to tell me why. But maybe if you give a little bit of the rationale to our audience, that could help.
Well, sure. So I think there's 2 parts to that. I mean, I think a series is nice for a topic like this because a one-off episode on discussion strategies is probably not going to get anyone very far because there's a lot of layers and nuance to discussion in the classroom. And for the second reason, something that I'm guessing, because I'm not in the classroom, so you have to confirm this with me, Marie, but I'm guessing is an area where there were a lot of steps backwards.
So yes. And I can't remember if you and I talked about this on the podcast or just talking, because as you all listeners know, we talk every day, multiple times a day. The biggest thing that I have seen and that a lot of other teachers that I've talked to have seen with students is not necessarily that they are academically, quote unquote, behind, right? That whole idea of like learning loss that people who don't know actual students talk about because they're like, and I'm using this very loosely, experts in the education field. There's no such thing as like, come on. There's a reason that people in their 80s can go and get a college degree. It's because you can learn stuff at any time. It's the social skills and the social adaptability that is real rusty because of a global trauma that we've all gone through in very different ways. And like, I am in week 9, I think now of the school year. And we're seeing like, there was a big push at the very beginning of in fact, I do think we talked about this on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. Like we had a big push of making sure that everybody acclimates to being back on campus together, right? Like even students who were on campus last year, this year is much more traditional looking of a school year. And I think to our own detriment. Like we spent a very large amount of energy at the beginning of the school year, making sure students were comfortable and acclimating them to being back on campus. Well, guess what? They're acclimated now and all of their crap is bubbling to the top. Like they're no longer nervous to be around other people or to be in a classroom. Now they just don't know how to be.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, same, like for me too, I'm like, okay, now that I'm like getting back into the mechanics of being a classroom teacher and not having a Zoom call going at the same time. And I know that that's not true necessarily for everybody listening. Like we're all in different, like depending on where you are on the globe, like there's different stuff going on. But for me, I was teaching hybrid. I had a Zoom call going on at the same time as I had kids in class. And I know that's how the school year was for you too, Amanda, last year. Now I'm back to being like a teacher, but I'm not necessarily back to being the well-oiled machine that I have been for a long time. Like I've been doing this for a long time, but man, some of those social pieces and like picking up on cues and then knowing what to do with the cues, even for me, are a little bit clunkier than I would hope they would be. And it's just because like there's a lot happening. There's a lot that has happened. And so something like discussion in a classroom, it can be rough. It takes some massaging through there. Yeah.
And I think it was rough before we got here. I mean,
you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Like genuinely like putting together opportunities for class discussion is work. And then having them go well is more work.
Yep. And
in our discipline of English language arts, it holds a different weight than other classes. It's a necessary weight all across the board. But I think with the expectations of so many, like reading, writing, listening, speaking, like all of those skills really have to be addressed in ELA. And I think what this series is going to hopefully do for teachers who are listening is one, give some perspective, right? Like here are all of the considerations and here's how you narrow it down to make it work for you. And then I think it's also going to help with kind of just troubleshooting the issues, whether that's the instructional issues, the issues of accommodating different kinds of learners through discussion. I have a lot to say about that. And then we actually want to give you some sort of live reaction. So I have a recorded conversation, a seminar actually from one of my classes a couple of years ago. And Marie and I want to play you a couple of just clips of that in our third episode in this series, and actually just talk to you about what we notice the kids are doing, how to either stay quiet or how to speak up. And so across the 3 episodes, we hope to just give you 3 different angles of either reconsidering what you do, trying something new, or just confirming that what you're doing is what you want it to be accomplishing. And that's really where we're at. And so we actually also put together a workbook for you all. You can download the workbook in our show notes. And if you catch us at any point during the series, we'll have it available for all 3 of those episode show notes. So grab it, download it. We're going to put a couple of like bullet points in there, things for you to remember that you don't even have to write down. And you can just use it, put it on the bulletin board behind your desk as like a little reference point to remember what you listened to. Because I know listening to podcasts in the car is great, but if you want to remember this or treat this as like a little mini PD for yourself, grab the notebook.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just to kind of recap what Amanda was saying before we get going full blown into this episode, we're going to talk today about some goals and strategies for discussion in the classroom. This will not be all encompassing, but it'll just be a place to start with focusing. Next week, you'll be hearing from us about troubleshooting discussions, because I think that is, I really think that one for me earlier on and right now in my career is what I need, are those like moments on how to troubleshoot. And then the last episode is what Amanda was talking about. We're going to give kind of a play-by-play, and that's about like giving feedback and assessing discussion and speaking and listening skills. So definitely, if you have the ability to stop right now, take a moment and pause us and go get that workbook, head to the show notes. That's going to be extremely helpful. Or just make sure you like bookmark this episode and come back to it so that you can take down the notes you need to take down. And it's time to cue the music.
Let's do it. You're listening to Brave New Teaching, a podcast for educators challenging the status quo. I'm Amanda, and I'm a high school English teacher in Illinois.
And I'm Marie, and I'm also a high school English teacher in Southern California. We're so glad you're here. Enjoy the show.
All right, let's dive into some goals and strategies and just how to even begin to approach discussion in the classroom. I think that just like anything, when it comes down to curriculum design or an activity or really anything you're going to be doing with children, with students, the first thing to do is to figure out the why, right? Yeah. What are you looking for? What are the goals? What do you want to get out of it? Lucky for us, at least when we're talking about English language arts standards, speaking skills and listening skills are like right up there. There's like Amanda said it in the intro, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. But the thing is, those skills go across the board for every content area. It's just easier and it seems a little bit more natural to focus on those skills in an ELA classroom. But truly everywhere, speaking skills and listening skills don't quite get the direct attention that they should, because they're so important.
They're huge. And the thing is too, like, not every discussion is meant to assess those skills. So that's kind of why we're starting here with what is the goal that we're hoping to achieve, because the goal will help us inform what kind of strategy to use. So not only do we have speaking and listening skills, but we're also, when we do discussions, trying to just build some classroom community. We're working on some soft skills. Like I can tell you last year, it really bubbled to the surface for me, but I made it a goal for every single time we opened up a discussion that everyone was to enter with an open mind. And that what that meant was you would be rewarded, not like with candy or something, but like it would be a reward or it would be a positive reflection on your grade if your mind changed, right? Like, but we as a country, I think, and we as a world, I'd say in general, we kind of come to these discussions. And I think students have kind of been conditioned to come to a discussion and hold firm on their ground and never defend
well, we
it,
teach, we teach them argument, right?
Yes.
Like, and I mean, that goes back to like even you and me, like we teach rhetoric and argument and how to prove yourself and make your claim and prove it with evidence and blah, 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 blah. But to your point, the soft skill of being able to hear another human being and build empathy and be open-minded and hear their claim and their evidence and maybe change your mind is just a piece of humanity that's super important to be able to have and practice.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that then the reason I put those together is because when we build a classroom community, it's so that we can create the kind of environment where we're not always feeling threatened when we have an opinion, right? Like,
right.
I think our kids do feel this sense of urgently defending themselves. And I think that if we can bring our classrooms to a better place than most adults in the world, that's a huge victory. Because if there is good evidence that shifts your original claim, you should be able to put your pride aside and shift your claim. And I think that being able to teach that to teenagers, that's not showing up on anybody's grade book. That's not showing up on any report card. I mean, but it's really, to me, one of the most important reasons to continually practice discussion and build the kind of classroom community that can host that and that can, like I said, reward that. Like that's something that we acknowledge, and it's an accolade. I'm proud of my students when there's a shift or that they have gained more evidence that helps them clarify where they originally stood, right? Like that's the goal for me. Those are two really important goals for me.
Well, yeah. And so Amanda started to say this a minute ago, like we're going to talk through a bunch of different goals that could possibly be part of a discussion or a reason for having discussion or, or some semblance of discussion in a classroom. Whatever the goal or like the main goal is going to then lend itself to which strategy or strategies you want to employ with students, right? So if I'm looking specifically at building community and open-mindedness, I'm going to shape and structure that discussion using certain strategies versus if I'm looking to really assess speaking skills, that's going to be a different strategy, right? Yeah. So like, I just wanted to make sure that was super clear. We're not saying everything goes for everything. We're just saying these are the different ways that you can kind of think about and approach designing a discussion and using different strategies.
I have to interrupt you because you use this word designing a discussion. Like all honesty, out on the table, I used to show up to class and be like, we're going to have a discussion. Like when I was a newer teacher, the thought of designing it, scaffolding it, or even preparing it with the idea of having a goal in mind, that didn't even exist for me. I used to just assign, we're going to read a couple chapters and talk about them. That was it. That was the lesson plan. Okay. That's why I want to
no, our listeners can't see that my eyes bugged out of my head because I was like, yeah, me too.
It's true.
Yeah, I know. Well, because you think to yourself, so you just discuss like, if everybody's prepared, if everybody's listened, if everybody has been paying attention in my classroom when I've been talking. I mean, I'm saying that voice because that's literally young me talking. Yes. If you've all been paying attention, you'll be fine. No, they won't, because discussion skills are skills. They are things that have to be learned, practiced, cultivated, and honed over time. And like, it takes direct instruction as well. That is one of the things that I kind of like tote in my own little thing over in the caffeinated classroom is like a whole thing on directly teaching listening and speaking skills as like just the same way that you would teach how to write a hook for an intro paragraph, like how to listen. It's hard.
It's a thing. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, but like,
no, not at all.
That's where we're at, is like, we need to be thinking through like, what is the goal of this particular discussion? Because that's fine. If you just want to chat about some chapters, you still want to structure something, but it's going to be different. Right.
Our approach as the instructor is going to be different, and the students' supports are going to be different. It also has to do with like where you're at on the continuum of learning. If it's the beginning of a course, if it's the beginning of high school, right? Or like wherever we're at, there are age appropriate and skill level appropriate and community closeness, classroom communityist. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Appropriate, right? So yeah, we've basically got like, are you looking at building skills? Are you looking at modeling and teaching skills? Are you looking at, first and foremost, right? Are you looking at community? Are you looking at argument specifically, or persuasion, or recall of knowledge? Or is there assessment that we're looking for? Like those are the things to define. And I would say if you can't boil it down to one, I don't know. How many goals would you say? Like I would try to boil it down to one main goal with maybe like a sidecar.
I think that's about right. And I think the other big distinction when making those goals, I think a lot of us have fallen into the trap of using these discussions for summative assessments. And we're going to throw a rubric together with a ton of things on there. We're going to have 4 speaking skills, 2 listening skills. But by the way, we're actually trying to assess what they learned in the novel. So we're also assessing their reading skills. And that's really overwhelming. Not that we can't do it, but we might choose to just focus on the evidence they use. Why are you going to grade their speaking skills if really what you're trying to figure out is what their comprehension of the novel was?
Well, that like leads you back. I mean, that reminds me of like one of the first Socratic seminars I ever ran. I just assumed too much with the kids, and I tried to assess too much. And I just was exhausted by the end going, they were fine. They repeated each other quite a bit because it wasn't structured enough for them, or it was too structured, or it was both at the same time. And then I was trying to do too much. So I had to, it was very hard.
Well, 100% to your point, Marie, is picking one that matters, because the one that matters should be connected to the goal, right, of that assignment. If your goal is to assess your unit in reading a choice novel, I really should put to the side listening skills, at least for a grade. Can I expect students to learn how to like listen well to one another and not repeat each other? Sure. But do I need to be wholeheartedly assessing everything all the time? And that's what we're going to look at, I think, in our last episode. I don't want to get off track too much, but the reason we're starting here with goals, and a lot of them, is because we need to think through what they are and manifest them, like write them down. And those need to be the focal point as you're going to get ready to design this discussion for what's coming forward.
Yeah. So we have for you all, our listeners, just to kind of like dive right in. We've talked a lot about goals. Let's talk about some strategies. We've got some specific discussion strategies. If you are not familiar with any of these strategies, we'll have some resources for you in the show notes on just kind of like where you can get the long and short of what each of these strategies is. But we're going to talk about these in terms of which goals they lend themselves towards, at least in our estimation, the best. So the first one, and I know that you've had this I haven't really used this strategy in my classroom super deliberately. Like it's kind of happened by default, just like trying to shape conversation in the moment. But I know that you've used one-word discussions. So do you want to tell us a little bit of like how you use it and what goals that works best for?
Sure. Yeah. A one-word discussion is really good when you have a quiet class and you're having a hard time getting them going. And so typically I use a one-word discussion for either starting something new where I'm trying to kind of recall prior knowledge or get students to share some personal connected experiences, or if we're going to review something that we've already read. So those are the goals that I think this best suits. And then really just how it lays out is I select somewhere between 6 and 10 single words, and they're usually conceptual, right? So they're going to be, if you followed along at all during our dystopia unit, if you're doing something with dystopia, your one words might be things like rebellion, conformity. There going to be words that have weight and layers.
Power. Yeah,
exactly. And they're not necessarily like tricky vocab words, although that's kind of fun to throw in there too. Ubiquitous, right?
Well, it just depends on where you're at. If you're doing a review or a recall, that would serve you in one way. Or if you're doing collecting background knowledge, that would also serve to know that like 2/3 of your class does not know ubiquitous. Okay. Note to self, teach ubiquitous.
100%.
Yeah.
And so it's really simple, and you can do this in a much more fancy way if you wanted to, but I do it really simply, either on a Jamboard or a Google slide deck. I put the single words, like they're on separate slides or separate jams. And I let the kids see.
Is that what those are called? They're called jams?
I don't know. I'm calling them
like strawberry or like marmalade.
Trademark.
Okay.
Amanda Cardenas.
Sorry. Separate jams. Yes.
And I let the kids see all of the words at once. So like they have a view only to the slide deck or view only to the Jamboard. And I asked the students, okay, of all these 10 words, like we'll use 10 for fun. I want you to choose 3 that strike a chord with you based on what you've read or based on what you know, right? Because remember, we're recalling something that happened the day before or in a previous experience, whether that was reading or real life. And I want you to choose 3 words. And then I want you to write down, like just in your notes or something very simple on an index card, that connection. So that word reminds me of when this happened. This word reminds me of when this happened. And so then I give them some time. So this is really kind of like also think, pair, share. I'm just giving them what to think about, which is these words are kind of guiding that discussion. So then they have their answers written ahead of time, which for a quiet class is really helpful. For a class that maybe that's just like a just a good scaffold for them.
Or for a squirrely ass class.
It's so good.
Yes. I mean, it's like, yeah.
It anchors them, writing their answers down first. And then we go through word by word. All right, let's start with Rebel. Who has something to share about a connection they had between that word and what we read yesterday? And if they each took 3, I have at least 4 or 5 kids who wrote about that word. And if you really want to know, you can have them, comment on the doc, or like if you want to see what they're working on, not a note card. There's lots of technological ways to make that more visual, but it's really simple. You just go word by 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 word. And
that's it. Yeah.
And the single words kind of do a really nice job of instigating that discussion, because you'll by nature just have some contradictory things, right? Some kids will write down things that you weren't expecting, or, they'll have different sides of it. So it's really nice, low prep and high success rate in terms of discussion, because they already wrote down their answers.
I was going to say, and high engagement or high involvement, because they've got something no matter what. So you could call on everybody or have them share with, so that everybody can speak, whether they have, and that's another thing. I mean, it's a lot like the Sesame Street quiz that we talk about so often. Like, this is very much like the hand in hand to the Sesame Street assessment, whereas this is more of like a practice or a pre, but it gives everybody a chance. Yes. So even if they've done nothing, they've got to have some sort of an idea, or they can open their book to a page and have some sort of something, right? Yeah. I love that.
Choice is good.
Yeah. Choice is phenomenal, as we know. Our second strategy is the 4 corners strategy. And I have forgotten how much I love using 4 corners. And I was using it a ton before we had to physically close the classrooms for COVID. And I have not brought it back into my classroom yet. And I'm realizing that right now. I need to.
I used 4 corners virtually last year too. I put it on a Jamboard and I put the 4 corners on the screen, and the kids had to move their Post-it note to the corner where they stood.
I thought about that, and then I was like, I have too many kids. That's too many Post-its. There's 40.
That's
that was too many Post-its. Couldn't do it. No, I love 4 corners because it forces students to, if we're quick and dirty of 4 corners, you've got 4 different viewpoints, each in a corner of the room. And kids have to pick one.
Yeah. Strongly agree. Yes. Disagree, strongly disagree, or whatever kind of scale you want to give.
Or 4 claims, right? Sure. Like whichever one there. Yes. But it's 4 viewpoints in some way or fashion around the room, and students have to pick one or the, it's also like, what's the one? Not hot seat. Is it hot seat where you
philosophical chairs?
Philosophical chairs. Thank you. Where there's only 2. I do like 4 corners because it provides a little bit of wiggle room, and it makes students choose something. I also love to use 4 corners in a way where they first have to choose what they most align with, and then go to the complete opposite and argue the opposite, because 4 corners is fantastic for exercising claims, evidence, analysis, being able to really articulate your argument and your reasoning. And so one of my favorite things to do within that strategy is to force them to argue the opposite of what they think. So wherever they are, they have to go to the opposite corner of the room. They get so mad.
They get really mad. And it's kind of cool too, if you're using this. So again, if we go back to goals, if you want to use this purely as an assessment of argumentation, right? Then maybe what you want to do is try to have a handful of students convincing a neutral group of students which side of the room to go to or which corner to go to. And then students are moving based on persuasion.
I like that.
Right? That's a really cool way to use it. I've also loved using this activity as a brainstorming session. So before an essay begins or before a research project begins, giving them some claims to start off with, and then moving around, right? Moving toward.
And adding to a poster in each corner, or being in a breakout room. Yeah, that's super smart. Well, no, I was just thinking when you were saying that, how cool would it be, since we do love the idea of choice, of having, the group who did whatever novel are convincing the people in the middle who haven't read the novel, right? Yes. And then that's a great exercise in claims and evidence and analysis and all of that good stuff. And I love the idea of brainstorming. What a great, we just might be using that tomorrow on their final. Hey, look at us doing my lesson planning for me, as I have to figure out a brainstorming activity for tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, it's so simple and low key prep. I mean, and you don't
Yeah.
even need to assess it. You just can do it. And then the kids can use what they learned during the day. They can write it down. They can give you an exit ticket. They can put it on an outline for the paper they're going to write later in the week. I mean, you don't even need to worry about it. It's fun and it's mobile, it gets kids moving around.
It is nice. Yes.
Is good.
Which is always good. Okay. Next on our list of strategies is a tool that we both know and love called Parlay. And if you were part of the Shakespeare Teacher Festival, if you were part of the Teaching Dystopia Festival, you know that we love us some Parlay. Parlay is an amazing, both like in-person and virtual tool for discussion. It's phenomenal. What are your favorite? Like I like using it in person actually best, which I think you do too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For me, this is definitely the kind of thing that if you're going to try to assess speaking and listening skills, you're going to get the kind of data readouts and information you need to be able to assess that. Because Parlay is a tool, right? You're still going to set up the discussion. You're still going to do all of the work, unless you just go from there. They have a whole universe full of discussion topics that are pre-made, which
really
are
awesome. Yes.
Really, really awesome. But if you're setting up something specific for yourself, Parlay does the heavy-handed work behind the scenes of collecting data, which is like, they can track for you the frequency of the number of times kids raise their hand or they attempt to get into the discussion, the types of ways that they do get involved in the discussion, the number of times they talk. They allow students to kind of give each other props and high fives and, their hand claps. And
yeah,
so
it creates ways that students can be involved without being the center every single time. Yes.
The data side, like the data readout at the end of a Parlay discussion for me is amazing because I throw it on the screen and we reflect on it. And I think the most successful discussions, if you're going to choose something, if you want it to go well, you've got to do it often.
All the time.
If you're going to try to nail Socratic Seminar, you've got to be in it for 3, 4, 5 times during your year or whatever your year looks like. And I think Parlay really helps set goals for the next one.
Well, and that's going to a nod to, I should have said this. Well, this isn't really for a goal. This is for a strategy as well. Like something like Parlay or even one word discussion or four corners or the other strategies we're going to talk about. We only have a couple more. Don't worry, friends. We're not going to be here forever. It's the frequency by which you use either the same strategies or different strategies, but like just getting kids talking and listening to each other frequently is a huge piece in really building community, all those other goals that we have. But then also like, I don't know how to say this, not the severity, but like the depth of the formality of the discussion. It can be super informal or an extremely formal discussion, but having varied formalities of different discussions and doing them frequently is fantastic. And Parlay is a great way to help you as a teacher structure that and keep track.
Yes.
Yes. It's so good. It's good for all of the skills and just depends on how you want to use it to make it really work for you and what your students need for this discussion and then for the next discussion. And
that takes us right into another strategy, which is to do small group simultaneous discussions. And when I was thinking about this before we met, I was thinking about a time when we were using Parlay actually to help me do this. So what I had actually set up in the room were 3 circles. And we were reading Columbine at the time. And I had in those 3 circles, 3 different questions. So circle 1 was discussing one pretty deep, serious question. Same with circle 2, same with circle 3. I was only sitting in one of the circles. And when I was in the circle, that's the circle I was evaluating. So the other 2 were on their own, but because they were using Parlay, I still got all the feedback. I got all the information. I knew who was talking, how often, and who was involved because Parlay tracks all of that. And so it was amazing that I was able to give like very undivided attention to one group while the other 2 were still talking about something really important. And then what I basically did was I rotated around the room and so did the question. So when I moved, the question changed and the kids got 3 questions that day, all dealing with Columbine, and they were able to kind of sustain on their own.
I think that's one of the things with discussion is it can get so behaviorally out of hand quickly if students aren't quite prepared, or you've got that rowdy group, or it's totally dead, right? Like there are a lot of different ways that a discussion can work not the greatest. And
which is why next week is all troubleshooting. An entire episode is on
troubleshooting. We're going to tell you how to troubleshoot for the Amandas and the Maries that are in your class that won't stop talking and dominate conversation. Yeah, we'll get to a lot of that, but having structure, using either a system that you really like or whatever it is. Obviously, we really like Parlay. One of the simultaneous ways to have small group or even just paired discussion that I really like is speed dating or speed debating, where I can set students up in a big long line or, figure it out in the room, how that's going to go, where they just talk to one person at a time or a pair talks to another pair at a time. And I feed them these can be pre-reading questions that have to do with concepts and that sort of thing. These can be along the way, recall. These can be at the end, prepping for a paper or a summative of some sort, discussing things that actually happened in a novel or and again, we're talking a lot about novels because that's our bread and butter here, to go back to the jam thing. Can you tell I'm a little hungry?
Oh, there we are. There?
You're welcome. And then if I can, you love me. So
I do. That's good.
But if I depending on what it is that we're going to be using, or even if it's nonfiction and we're talking about current events, or we're talking about, or, in a different classroom, they can be talking about different content area discussion based sorts of things. Tiny little slips of paper are what I will hand out for speed dating or speed debating, so that it's fresh. They get something different every time. We're rotating things and prompts around the room, and they're talking to somebody new, and it's very short. And those goals are met very quickly. And then we always debrief, which we'll talk more about with troubleshooting next week. But our last strategy is one that I used to screw up all the time. It's like a fishbowl or Socratic seminar, big formal discussion. And the way that I always screwed it up is I treated it always as a big formal discussion. And it doesn't always have to be a big formal discussion.
It doesn't, but the formality of it, I think, is really powerful in its own right. I mean,
the structure, I think the structure of it. Formality is one thing. Formality is a level of prep, right? That's if you're going to use a Socratic seminar as a summative assessment or even a formative assessment. That to me is more formal, but we're talking about structure. The structure of these types of conversations doesn't have to be super formal. It's just structured.
Correct. And I actually have always used Socratic seminar as a highly structured summative evaluation. I have not really, in my experience, other than maybe a handful of times in AP, which are, again, right, we've talked about your groups have different needs and different levels of what they need. So for me, and my most memorable experiences of Socratic seminar were they're going to be on these 2 days. And we made name tags, and I had little mini bottles of water, and it was a big deal. And kids came very prepared. It was very much a practice that we worked on over time. And the goal for me for Socratic or Fishbowl, and if you don't know the difference between the two, that's not a big deal. We can link that below. They're both aiming, I think, to get whole class discussion that is organic, student-led, and student generated, right? The students continue the conversation, and they're really the ones who are leading it. Now, that is not to say that we're not doing a crap ton of stuff on the outside.
We're facilitating for sure. And a lot of that has to do with our troubleshooting too, but yeah.
Big time. And I think so for Socratic, for me, the goal has been to get to a place where they are running their own discussion and they're on their own. And I'm totally faded into the background. They are 100% in the reins. And with my experience, that's taken 2 or 3 shots at it. And then when we kind of get there, then the goals change, right? Then the goal is, okay, well, how do we elevate the conversation rather than just making sure everyone goes around the circle and reads their notes out loud?
To get to that point, to be able to use any sort of discussion in a way that is a really, truly summative assessment of skills and learning, you have to do all the small pieces along the way. You have to do all the other goals, all the community building, all the open-minded, all the empathy, all the recall and practice of these speaking and listening skills to be able to have that be an actual end all be all. So like what I was saying with like, it doesn't have to be super formal. The way that I have used Socratic Seminar the best in my classroom is using it at the bookends. Like I'll use a Socratic Seminar or a fishbowl at the very beginning of a unit or the beginning of a course to just talk about big ideas and let people tap in and out and do, but like no prep, just questions, talk, get in there. Let's go, people. And it'll be super surface level where you're kind of cringing at some of the things and being like, okay, well, we need to work on that. And that also gives me a great diagnostic of where like I need to get going. And then to round it out at the other bookend with a true summative, structured and highly formal discussion. It's just like,
yep, we're the same.
That's how it is.
Same person. Yep, we're the exact same person because the core question at the table is the essential question for the unit, right? Like, let's bring it all home. Did you know, Marie and listeners, that much to the debate of the internet, whether or not this is a good practice, we had our first Socratic Seminar discussion on the 10th day of school every year, day 10.
I mean, so, I would have it on day 4. I mean, yeah, it just depends. Yeah.
It ended up being day 10, but like, I mean, within the first 10 days of school, we get in and have one right away. And it was always our assessment, like, and I use assessment very loosely here, but our assessment of our summer reading. And so summer reading was on the list of texts, but so were a couple of articles that I got in there at the beginning of the year and things like that. And our yearly essential question, right? Our year-long essential question was the question at the hand of the kids. And it was, I prepped them very little. They could bring what they read over the summer, what they read on their articles. And that was it. And I'm telling you, like, people who have done it agree with me. People who haven't done it are not sure that this is true, but it was the best way I've ever gotten to know my class.
Oh yeah.
I do a lot of writing. I do a lot of other things, like get to know my kids, but like, watching the dynamics of a Socratic unfold before you really know anybody is amazing to watch.
And I mean, I have to say, because I think people who are saying that's too early to have a discussion is because they're saying you need to build relationships, you need to build community, you need to build. Absolutely. This is a very soft discussion, a very glossary, like on the surface, because then you dive into topics as you build along the way. But yeah, I mean, to be able to talk to kids is the best way to build relationships. Absolutely. And to be able to see them talk to each other and learn their dynamics and see who's going to need you in different ways before they tell you. Yeah, because they're not going to tell you. They're 15. No. They're never going to tell you. They don't know. Yeah.
And I think we don't give ourselves enough not credit, but like, I do make assumptions about my kids in those first couple of weeks. I do feel like I'm making guesses about what they do and do not know or can.
You're a human. You're a human. Of course you are. That's literally what we do. Yeah.
But then you hear them do their thing and you're like, oh, okay. So we're actually starting here, or, we're actually starting here. You know, it really gives you a much more genuine and authentic way of knowing where your kids are. And I'm like, why was I collecting so much writing? That was so much grading and work on me. And it wasn't really as clear.
You're reminding me that oh my gosh, this whole episode is just going to be me planning next quarter. I need to start that way. The beginning of the year was just like all hands on deck. Is everybody okay? And now it's kind of like, well, no, clearly they're not okay. So let's figure out some different ways to make them feel a little bit better. Obviously, if you're listening to a podcast, you can't be too anti-discussion since you are listening to us discuss things every single week. But like we said, this is kind of where we're going to round out our goals and strategies and which strategies best fit each goal or how we've used them in different ways. The idea here is that this bubbles up some ideas, right? It starts getting some inspiration going. Make sure you head to the show notes and grab the workbook so that you can take some notes down and you can even see a little bit of a preview of what's coming next week and the following week. Next week, we're going to be talking all about troubleshooting and facilitating and like our role while a discussion is actually happening and just some different like best practices around those sorts of things. And then the following week, our third and final episode in this series is going to be a play-by-play commentary of one of Amanda's past classes having little pieces of a discussion where we're going to talk about what sorts of feedback we can give students and how to frame that feedback. And then also literally how to assess. We can tell you assess till we're blue in the face, but these sorts of soft skills, you really got to get into the nitty gritty of like how and like what to do with it. So that's what we're going to go through and just kind of give some different practices and strategies and see what you can do to bring that into your own classroom.
And remember that we ran through quite a few different things today. The goal of what we went through was not to get you to feel like you have to do all the things. That is not at all where we're at. What we're trying to do is bubble up, like Marie said, and remind you that if you've done some of these things in the past and they didn't go well, maybe your next step is trying it again, and then trying it again, and then trying it again. And we're here for it. We're here for you, and we're here for it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you heard me go, oh yeah, that. Oh yeah. No, I got to do that. I mean, these things ebb and flow depending on your population and their current needs. So my population's current needs are, they just need to talk. They just need to like get it all out. And whether it's about a character or
you need
what
some
they
four
ate for
corners
lunch,
in your life. Yeah.
I do need some four corners in my life. Absolutely. So friends, if you have a moment to give us a rating and review on iTunes, we would be ever so appreciative. It helps others find us and join the Brave New Teaching community. And we cannot wait to come back at you next week with another installment of this series. And until we meet again, we will see you all next time.
Bye-bye.